Hello? Is this thing on? Alright, here we go. My first travel vlog, and it is to the other side of the world, where after 20 hours of travel, we had finally arrived in Hanoi, Vietnam. After a crazy taxi ride into town, we got our priorities aligned. So first things first, Vietnamese iced coffee. By the time we arrived at our Airbnb, we were a bit early, so we checked out a book alley, which was right by our place. It had a bunch of small bookstores and a couple of cafes. Once all the coffee was gone, we met up with Quang's dad and his sisters and headed out on an adventure. We walked over to Hoan Kiem Lake, or Lake of the Returned Sword, in the center of Hanoi's historic center. According to Vietnamese legend, in 1428, Emperor Lý Loy was taking a cruise on the Hoi Kiem Lake when the golden turtle god surfaced and asked for his magic sword to be returned. Years before, Emperor Loy had defeated the Chinese with the sword he had crafted from metal left behind by the Dragon King. The sword was called Heaven's Will because of the words that appeared on it after he made it. The sword was vital to the emperor's success over the Chinese, so out of respect for the golden turtle god, he tossed the sword back into the lake. Over the years, large, soft-shell turtles had been sighted in the lake, but alas, the last one was found dead in 2016. But to this day, the Turtle Tower still stands proudly on an island in the middle of the lake, commemorating the golden turtle god. That night, it was time for our first tour of the trip, Hanoi After Dark by Vespa Adventures. Our drivers picked us up and we scooted into town. My driver, Happy, was the tail car, so we followed the group as we wound through the streets of Hanoi. A scooter is really the best way to see the town because there aren't really traffic laws, or at least they aren't followed. There aren't clear lanes and most traffic lights are just completely ignored, so we zipped between cars, dodged pedestrians, and finally made our way to our first stop, a cafe in Hanoi's old quarter where we got more Vietnamese iced coffee. The cafe was next to St. Joseph's Cathedral. Our tour guide told us that more than 75% of the population of Vietnam practices either no religion or just some folk beliefs, and this cathedral was built by the French in the late 1800s. Not wanting to disturb Sunday evening mass even more than we already had, it was off to our next stop. We rode across the train tracks and then basically walked down them to get to where we were going. The train cuts right through town and in fact right between these buildings. We sat down to try flavored rice wine, it was really gross, and spicy buffalo jerky, but we took a break to watch the train pass mere inches from the front of this restaurant. As soon as the train passes, you can see a mass of scooters jockeying to get past and get back on the road. After another short ride, we arrived at a restaurant to try bún chả. A Hanoi classic, bún chả is a rice noodle dish served with grilled pork and meatballs with a side of nem or spring rolls. Our next stop, more food, obviously. We tried the local specialty of pho cuon and learned the art of wrap and roll Vietnamese style. What followed was more driving and more eating, which included driving past a flag tower at the Hanoi Citadel. The tower was built in 1812 during the Nguyen Dynasty as an observation post. Unlike many other structures in Hanoi, it was not destroyed during the French invasion of 1896. We also rode past Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum, a gift from the Soviets to honor the departed leader. We hopped off the bikes at one of the last old city gates, constructed in the 1700s to mark the city's boundary. According to our tour guide, the city has outgrown the old walls and gates, expanding far beyond their perimeter. The one we stopped at is one of the last ones still standing, preserved for history and white tourists like us. It was a thrill riding around town on the back of a Vespa. Happy to point out the sights to me as we drove, including John McCain Lake, where current senator and former Air Force pilot was shot down and fished out. We also talked about what video games he plays. Turns out we play the same ones, I think. Streets in Hanoi are often organized by what shops occupy them. So after turning down Phone Case Street and Shoe Street, we made it to our final destination, the Hanoi Opera House. The Opera House is more than 100 years old and sits on a busy square in downtown Hanoi.
This building becomes a very important building in Hanoi.
A short walk led us to our last hangout of the night, a jazz club. We sat and listened to the sounds of a really good Vietnamese trio playing 30s era jazz. We all tried custom cocktails and then took in the music. Once the music started to fade, we hopped back on our scooters for the trek back to our place and said our goodbyes to our tour guide, Happy, and the other drivers. We slept well that night, not knowing what fresh adventures would greet us in the morning.